She woke up every day before sunrise, not out of discipline, not out of choice, out of habit, having learned that darkness is kinder to bodies like hers. In the dim light of the kitchen, her broad arms didn't draw attention. Her hands, thick and cracked from work, seemed just hands. And the silence of the early morning had no eyes to measure her waist, nor a mouth to comment on how much space she occupied in the world. Marta lived in a house that wasn't hers, on a farm that wasn't hers, in a life that seemed to have been designed for someone else, someone thinner, prettier, more desirable. She took care of the children of Dona Helena, the wealthy widow from the municipality of São Roque das Palmeiras. The town was too small to hide any secrets, and too big for anyone to care about hers. There were 3 children, 9-year-old Pedro, who had the serious look of someone who already understood that the world is not fair, 6-year-old Ana Luisa, who still believed in fairies but was beginning to doubt, and 3-year-old Tomas, who called Marta Tata because it was the first word he learned to say, even before Mommy, and Dona Helena never forgave him for that. Dona Helena wasn't cruel in the way one might expect. She didn't yell, she didn't hit, she didn't humiliate with sharp words in front of visitors. Her cruelty was made of sighs, of lingering glances at Marta's plate at lunchtime, of phrases that began with, "Not that I mean any harm," and ended with something that hurt for days. "Marta, don't you think you should eat less rice? I'm saying this for you, dear. No man will look at you like that." Or when a visitor asked who that young woman was, Dona Helena would answer softly as if apologizing. "That's Marta. She takes care of the children. Poor thing. She has a huge heart, and a big body too." And she would laugh. She always laughed. And the visitors would laugh along, and Marta would smile too, because she had learned that smiling hurts less than crying in front of others. She was 32 years old. She had never dated. She had never been kissed. She had never been chosen to dance at a June festival, nor to be anyone's partner at any graduation ceremony. At school, I sat in the back. At parties, I stayed. She sat near the food table, not because she wanted to eat, but because it was the only place where her presence made sense in the eyes of others. The fat girl near the food? It was almost a self-telling joke. She never complained, never screamed, never said it hurt. She just swallowed, as she swallowed everything, silently, with a smile that no one realized was armor. Her room was at the back of the house, past the laundry room, in a room that had previously been a storage room. Dona Helena had a bed put in it, an old fan that made more noise than wind, and a thin curtain in place of the door. "For now," Dona Helena said when she arrived 5 years ago. The "for now" never ended. Marta hung an image of Our Lady on the wall, a photo of her mother, who had already passed away, and a small round mirror that she avoided looking at directly. Sometimes, at night, before going to sleep, she would slowly run her hand over her own face, as if trying to recognize someone she had never been introduced to. She imagined what it would be like to wake up and be someone else, not necessarily thin, just seen. Just noticed for something other than the shape of her body. The children loved her in a way only children know how to love. Unfiltered, uncalculated, without shame. Pedro would ask her to tell him stories before bed and hold her hand tightly, as if he feared she would disappear. Ana Luisa would comb Marta's hair with a doll's brush and say she was the most beautiful princess in the kingdom, and Marta would laugh and cry at the same time, inside, in a place no one could see. Tomas simply wouldn't leave her side. He slept in her lap, ate in her lap, cried, and only stopped in her lap. When Dona Helena tried to pick him up, the boy would stretch his little arms back to Marta, and Helena's face would close like a door slammed in the wind. "You spoil that boy too much," Helena would say. But they both knew it wasn't spoiling. It was love, and that was exactly what Helena couldn't stand, that her children loved that fat, uneducated woman without a surname, without beauty, more than their own mother. Helena never said it aloud, of course, but Marta felt it. Marta always felt everything, because those who are invisible develop an emotional hearing, superhuman, hears what is not said, sees what is not shown, and carries everything without saying a word. He arrived on a Tuesday in September. The truck stopped in front of the farm near noon, raising a red dust that stained the air as if the ground itself were bleeding. It was an old truck, its paint peeling, carrying tools, posts, and rolls of wire. Dona Helena had hired someone to rebuild the property's fences, which had been crumbling for months. The man got out of the truck slowly, his hat pulled down, his boots worn, his faded shirt open at the chest. He had large hands, a sunburnt face, and an old scar that ran from his left eyebrow to the middle of his cheek, like a dry river mapped onto his skin. His name was Elias. Marta was hanging clothes on the line when she saw him. She felt nothing special. There was no music, no trembling, none of that shiver that soap operas promise. She simply looked, registered it, and went back to hanging clothes. Men like that didn't look at women like her. This wasn't bitterness. It was a statistical fact of her entire life. Elias was 44 years old, with an ex-wife who had left him for a wealthier farmer, 2 children who lived with their mother in Mato Grosso do Sul, and whom he saw once a year, when he had enough money for the bus fare. He carried a photo of them in his pocket, crumpled from being folded and unfolded so many times. He spoke little, he ate what he had, he slept wherever he was told. He worked as if work were the only prayer he knew how to say. When he arrived at Dona Helena's farm, he looked around, assessed the size of the job with his eyes, and simply said, "It can be done in 3 weeks, if the weather cooperates." Helena liked him, not him per se, but how useful he was. A quiet, hard-working man without demands. The kind of person you hire, use, and forget. She told Marta to prepare a plate of food and take it to the corral, where he would set up his temporary camp. "Take it there and come back quickly. Don't waste time chatting." Marta carried it. The plate weighed less than the silence between them. She placed the food on top of an overturned barrel and said, without looking him in the eye, "If you need more, just say so." And she turned her back. Elias looked at the plate. Then he looked at her, who was walking away with that heavy, hurried gait of someone who wants to disappear. He said nothing, but he didn't take his eyes off her until she disappeared behind the house. In the early days, the routine was mechanical. Marta would bring the food, collect the plate, and return. They didn't talk beyond what was necessary. Elias would thank her with a nod. Marta would respond with another. It was a dialogue of gestures, a language of people who had learned that words are expensive. But there was something there, beneath the silence, that neither of them could name. Elias began to notice that the food was always well prepared. The rice fluffy, the beans seasoned with a taste reminiscent of home, the roast meat perfectly cooked, and always a piece of fruit for dessert. One day, he found a carefully folded napkin under the plate, as if that minimal gesture were a letter that needed no words. On the 5th day, Peter appeared at the corral. He watched Elias work from afar, with that serious curiosity that only a fatherless boy possesses. Elias pretended not to see. He continued hammering stakes. But when the boy approached and asked, "What's that for?" Elias stopped, took off his hat, wiped the sweat from his brow, and replied, in a hoarse voice that seemed to come from a very deep place, "To keep together what wants to separate." Pedro sat nearby and stayed there all afternoon. The next day he returned, and the next, and the next. Ana Luisa came along one Wednesday, bringing a drawing she had made of a horse. Crooked, disproportionate, beautiful, in the way only a child's drawing is beautiful. Elias looked at the drawing with an attention the girl wasn't used to receiving from adults. "Beautiful horse," he said. "Does it have a name?" Ana Luisa smiled. "Thunder." Elias returned the drawing and said, "Thunder is the name of a fierce horse. This one looks fierce." The girl ran off to tell Marta that the man by the fence had liked Thunder. Marta listened, smiled, and felt a strange sensation in her chest, a kind of warmth that wasn't coming from the stove. Thomas was the last to approach. One day, he escaped from the enclosure and stumbled to the corral with his chubby, determined little legs. When Elias saw him, he dropped his hammer and stood still, watching that little creature coming towards him with open arms. Thomas stopped in front of him, looked up with his enormous eyes, and said, "Lap." Elias swallowed something that wasn't food. He looked around, as if asking permission from someone who wasn't there. Then he crouched down, picked up the boy, and placed him on his lap. Thomas rested his head on his shoulder and stayed there, quiet, as if he had found a place he already knew. When Marta appeared looking for Tomas and saw that scene, she stopped. She said nothing. She just stood there, her hands wet with dishwashing water, watching a rude, silent man holding a boy who wasn't his, as if he were the most precious thing in the world, and something inside her, something that had been locked away for 32 years, made a noise. It wasn't a snap, it was more like a crack, slow, deep, irreversible. From that day on, the conversations began. Not suddenly, not intensely, but like a light rain that starts unnoticed and suddenly soaks everything. Marta would pick up her plate and stay for another minute, then 2, then 5. Elias would tell stories from the road, not with pride, but with the weary honesty of someone who had slept in many places and called none of them home. He spoke of his children with a choked voice. He spoke of his ex-wife without resentment, only with the kind of sadness that comes when we accept that we've lost something that perhaps was never truly ours. Marta listened, and listening, she knew how to do better than anything. One night, after the children were asleep, Marta went out the back and into the corral. I didn't know why. She had no excuse, no dish to take, no reason she could explain to herself without feeling ashamed. Elias was sitting on a stool, mending an old saddle by the light of a lantern. When he saw Marta approaching, he didn't seem surprised. He simply moved a box aside, making room. She sat down, and they stayed there in silence, listening to the crickets and the wind in their arms. Eucalyptus trees for almost an hour without saying a single word. And that hour was the most fulfilling Marta had ever experienced. It was Dona Helena who broke that. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Women like Helena notice when someone's attention wanders, even if that someone is just the plump maid who takes care of the children. One morning, while Marta was tidying the kitchen, Helena leaned against the doorframe and spoke, in that gentle voice that cut deeper than a knife. "Marta, I need to tell you something, for your own good. Don't delude yourself with that man. I know you're needy, poor thing, and any attention seems like love. But look at yourself. Look closely. Do you think a man like that would want anything with you? He's polite, Marta. Polite. Don't confuse politeness with self-interest." Marta didn't answer. She continued drying the plate, which was already dry. Her hands trembled, but her face didn't. She had learned since childhood to tremble only on the inside. Helena continued, "I say this because I like you. You're good at what you do, but everyone has their place, right? Don't humiliate yourself." When Helena left, Marta put the plate in the cupboard, closed the door, and stood there looking at her own hands. Hands that cooked, that washed, that rocked, that repaired, that caressed children who weren't hers, and that cleaned a house that would never be hers. Hands that had never been held by anyone. She pressed them tightly together, as if trying to hug herself with them, and breathed deeply until the pain returned to its usual place, that dark corner of her chest where she kept everything she couldn't show. That night, Marta didn't go to the corral, nor the next, nor the one after that, Elias noticed. On the third day, when she came to leave her lunch plate, he looked at her differently, not with pity. Marta recognized pity from a mile away, and this wasn't pity. It was something else. It was a question asked without words. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Okay," she said, and she left quickly. Elias stared at the plate. This time there was no folded napkin underneath. A week passed in this new distance. The children continued to go to the corral, and Elias continued to receive each one with that serious and silent attention that seemed to heal something in them that no adult had realized was broken. Pedro began to help with the fences, holding the wire while Elias stapled. Ana Luisa brought drawings every day. Now, it wasn't just Trovão, it was a whole family of horses, with names and stories. And Tomas continued to ask for cuddles with the regularity of someone asking for oxygen. Marta watched everything from afar. From the kitchen window, the laundry room door, the corner of the clothesline, she saw and felt that thing growing in her chest, that warmth that didn't come from the stove, that pain that didn't come from humiliation, that wish she never allowed herself to name. To be part of something, to belong, to be chosen, not out of obligation, not out of lack of choice, not out of charity. To be chosen because someone looked at her and saw something worthwhile. But Helena's words had done their job. They were there, like nails in wood, holding everything in place. "Look at you. Do you think a man would want anything to do with you?" One Friday afternoon, something happened that changed everything. Dona Helena received a call and had to travel urgently to the capital. Her mother had fallen and broken her femur. Helena packed her suitcase in 20 minutes, gave Marta quick instructions about the children, and before leaving through the door, looked at her with a warning in her eyes. "Take care of this house, and take care of yourself." The "take care of yourself" wasn't care, it was a threat. Helena left, and the farm felt strangely light, as if someone had opened a window that had been closed for years. The children, they noticed. Pedro smiled more. Ana Luisa sang while she drew. Thomas slept without crying for the first time in weeks. On the first night without Helena, Marta made dinner and, without thinking too much, or thinking too much but pretending not to, made an extra dish. She placed the food on a tray, covered it with a clean dish towel, and took it to the corral. Elias was sitting on the same stool, mending a leather glove. When he saw Marta, he slowly raised his eyes, and in his eyes there was something that seemed like relief. She placed the plate in the box beside him. This time, she didn't turn her back. She stood there, with her hands crossed in front of her, as if she didn't know what to do with them. Elias looked at her, looked at the plate, and said, "Sit down." She sat down. They ate together, he on the stool, she on the box. The lamp cast a yellow light on them both, and the shadows that formed on the wall were large and close, as if their bodies, in the version projected by the light, already knew what their real bodies still didn't have the courage to do. "Why did you stop coming?" he asked bluntly, without calculated delicacy, with the raw sincerity of someone who hasn't learned to hide his feelings. Marta looked at the floor. "I thought I was bothering someone." "Who said that?" She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. Elias finished chewing, put the plate aside, and stared at his own boots for a while. Then he spoke slowly, as if treading on potentially crumbling ground. "I've spent my whole life being treated like a tool. I arrive somewhere, do the job, and leave. Nobody asks my name. Nobody asks if I'm okay. Nobody touches me. I'm used to it. But then I got here, and there was a woman who... She brought food that tasted like home, and 3 children who ran to see me as if I were someone special. And there you were, sitting there beside me, quiet, and I felt that for the first time in many years, I was in a place where I wanted to be. Marta didn't look at him. If she did, she would cry. And she was afraid that if she started crying, she would never stop. "I'm not pretty," she said, almost voicelessly. "I know who I am. I know what people see when they look at me. I'm not good enough for any man. I'm not good enough to be a wife or a girlfriend or anything like that. I know how to take care of children. I know how to cook. I know how to clean. I know how to be quiet. That's all I know how to do." Elias let the silence linger between them for a moment. Then he turned to her and said, in the deepest, gentlest voice Marta had ever heard from a human being, "I'm not looking for a beautiful woman. I've already had that. And she left when the money ran out. I'm looking for a woman who makes me want to stay. And every time I eat the food you make, every time I see you with those children, every time I remember you sitting there in that box, quiet, beside me, asking for nothing, demanding nothing, I think, this woman is the place where I want to live." Marta looked up, and for the first time in 32 years, she looked directly into the eyes of a man who was looking directly at her, not at her body, not at her size, not at what was missing or superfluous, at her, at who she was when no one was measuring, and she cried, not in the discreet way she knew. She cried like someone opening a dam. She cried with her whole body, her hands on her face, her shoulders trembling with a sound that came from a place so ancient and so deep it seemed to belong to another life. She cried for every time she was ignored, for every time she was compared, for every time she ate alone in the back of the kitchen, for every time she looked in the mirror. He circled the storage room and looked away, recalling each time he smiled when he wanted to scream, each time he said, "Everything's fine," when nothing was. Elias didn't hug her, not immediately. He stayed there nearby, waiting, like someone who knows that certain pains need space to come out. When Marta's crying began to subside, when it became just ragged breathing and spaced sobs, he extended his hand, that large, calloused hand, dirty with earth and grease, and placed it on hers. That was all, one hand on top of the other, and Marta felt that touch run through her entire body as if it were the first time someone had confirmed that she existed. They stayed there until the lamplight was almost out. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. What happened that night was greater than a kiss, more intimate than any touch. It was the recognition of 2 solitudes that finally met and said, without needing words, "I see you." In the days that followed, the farm transformed in a way that couldn't be measured with the eyes, but felt with the whole body. Marta cooked while singing. Not loudly, not for anyone to hear, but she sang, and that fact alone was a silent revolution. The children spent their afternoons in the corral, and now Marta went along. She sat in the box, which Elias had sanded and covered with a piece of old leather to make it more comfortable, and stayed there while Pedro learned to tie wire. Ana Luisa drew increasingly beautiful horses, and Tomas slept in Elias's lap, or in hers, alternating between the two as if they were 2 halves of the same place. Elias wasn't a man of grand gestures, but he started appearing at the kitchen door early in the morning before starting work, just to say good morning with a wave, and drink the coffee that Marta left ready for him in a blue mug she set aside just for that. One day, he brought a sprig of wildflower from the woods, a simple yellow flower that grew among the stones, and placed it on the box where Marta sat. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Marta saw the flower, held it with both hands, and she kept it inside her mother's recipe book, between the page for cornbread and the page for rice pudding. Everything seemed to be heading towards a good place. A possible place. Not perfect, not grandiose, but real. And real was more than Marta had ever dared to want. Helena returned on a Sunday. She arrived with the car full of bags, her mood clouded by 2 weeks caring for a mother who treated her with the same indifference she had treated Marta. She entered the house, looked around with the eyes of an inspector, and immediately realized that something had changed. Not the house. The house was spotless, cleaner than ever, the food ready, the children bathed and combed. What had changed was Marta. Helena couldn't say exactly what it was, but something in the way Marta moved, how she held her shoulders, how she looked, was different. There was a verticality in her that hadn't existed before. A presence. Helena didn't like it. On Monday morning, Helena went to the corral to check on the progress of the work. The fences were almost finished. Only the section bordering the river was missing. Elias explained what was left in a few words. Helena listened, nodded, and then, as if casually asked, "Is Marta treating you well? Bringing you food properly?" "Yes," said Elias. "Mrs. Marta is very thoughtful." "Mrs. Marta?" Helena repeated, savoring the word as if it were sour. "You call her Mrs.?" Elias didn't answer. He went back to work. Helena returned home with her jaw clenched. That night, while Marta was bathing Tomas, Helena appeared in the bathroom and said, without warning, He's leaving next week. When the fence is finished, he'll go. And he'll do what men like him do. He'll go to next job, next farm, and you won't remember your name in 2 months? So for God's sake, Marta, wake up. Don't play dumb. Marta continued lathering Thomas with soap. I know he will, she said, with a calmness that surprised even herself. I always knew. Then why are you making that silly face? Marta stopped. She looked at Helena, and for the first time in 5 years, she spoke in a voice that didn't apologize for existing. Because even if he leaves, even if I never see him again, I'll know that someone looked at me and saw something, and that's more than I've had in my entire life in this house. Helena opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, said nothing. She left the bathroom with the face of someone who had been slapped without anyone raising a hand. Elias's last days on the farm passed with the cruel speed that time has when we want it to stop. The fences were closed, the posts aligned, the wire stretched. The work was beautiful, sturdy, done with the precision of someone who puts into the things they build the same care they would have liked to receive. On the eve of leaving, Elias asked to speak with Marta. They met behind the house, near the laundry tub, at the end of an afternoon when the sky was so red it looked as if someone had spilled paint on the world. Elias was holding his hat in his hand. Marta had never seen him without one. His head was partially bald, with gray hairs stuck together by the mark of the hat, and he seemed smaller, more vulnerable, more human. He stood there for a while, looking at the ground, organizing words that clearly didn't come easily. I'm going to finish a job in Goiás. It'll take about 40 days. Then I have another one in Minas. Another 30 days or so. I have a small piece of land near Araguari. It's not big, it's not pretty, it has almost nothing. There's a house that needs renovation, a pasture that needs cleanliness, and a silence that needs someone to share it with. He raised his eyes. I don't know how to speak beautifully. I don't know how to make promises. I've made promises before and couldn't keep them, and that ate me up inside. But I can say what I know. I know I want to go back. I know I want you to be there when I return. And I know that land over there is nothing on its own, but with you, it can be something. Marta didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, I need time. I know, said Elias. I'm not asking for haste. I'm asking for permission to wait. And it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to Marta. Elias left the next morning before sunrise, as Marta usually woke up, at the time when the darkness is gentlest. Marta heard the truck start, heard the engine sputter twice, heard the wheels on the ground, and heard the silence that followed. A silence that weighed differently from all the other silences she knew, because this one was full, not empty. The weeks that followed were strange. The farm returned to its old routine, but Marta did not. Something within her had shifted, like a piece of furniture that changes position and makes the whole room seem different. She still woke up early, still cooked, still cared for the children with the same unbridled love as always. But now there was an unease in her gestures, a question she asked herself every night before bed, looking in the round mirror, no longer averting her eyes, but looking straight ahead, slowly, trying to see what Elias had seen. Pedro asked when the fence boy was coming back. Ana Luisa kept new drawings in a folder. For when he comes... Tomas looked at the empty corral and said, Lap? With that voice of someone who doesn't understand why people leave. Helena noticed everything, of course. And instead of attacking, she changed her strategy. She began to be kind, frighteningly kind. She complimented Marta's cooking. She gave her an afternoon off. She bought a dress, loose, dark, shapeless, and he said it was a gift. Marta accepted everything politely and suspiciously. She recognized that kindness. It was the kindness of someone who wants to keep someone in their place. 2 months later, a letter arrived. Not by mail. It was delivered by a passing truck driver who stopped at the farm to ask for water. There's a package for someone named Dona Marta, the man said, handing over a yellowed and crumpled envelope. Marta picked up the letter with both hands. She took it to the back room. She sat on the bed and opened it. The handwriting was crooked and cramped, like someone unaccustomed to writing. There were grammatical errors, crossed out and rewritten words, and a stain that could have been coffee or something else. The letter read, Marta, I finished the work in Goiás. I'm going to Minas now. The land is still there. I cleared the pasture. I fixed the roof of the house. I put a curtain on the bedroom window. Blue, because I remembered that the mug you used to set aside for me was blue. I don't know if you've decided. I don't know if you'll want it. But the door is open, and I'm waiting. Not in a hurry. With hope. Elias. Marta read it 3 times. On the 3rd time, she could no longer see the letters because her eyes were blurry. She folded the letter, placed it inside her mother's recipe book, between the dried yellow flour and the rice pudding recipe, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to her own heart make a noise that she finally recognized. It wasn't fear. It was courage trying to be born. It took Marta another 2 weeks to make the decision. Not because she had doubts about Elias, but because she had doubts about herself. Her whole life had taught her that staying was safer than leaving, that conforming hurt less than taking a risk, that women like her didn't have the right to want more. Every day, Helena's voice mingled with her mother's voice, with the voices of her teachers, with the voices of her schoolmates, with the voice of the whole world saying the same thing in different ways. Stay where you are. You have no other place for yourself. But there were Elias's eyes. And there was the blue mug, and there was a curtain of the same color in a window in Araguari, and there was an open door. It was Pedro who unknowingly helped her decide. One night, while Marta was putting him to bed, the boy held her hand and said, "Tata, why don't you go and be happy?" "I am happy here with you all," said Marta. Pedro looked at her the way 9-year-olds look when they know an adult is lying. "You're good here, but you're not happy. Happiness is different." Marta turned off the light. She stayed in the dark, holding the boy's hand until he fell asleep. And when he slept, she stayed a little longer, looking at the ceiling that wasn't hers, listening to the fan that wasn't hers, feeling the bed that wasn't hers, in the house that would never be hers. And she understood that Pedro was right. Being good wasn't the same as being happy, and she had spent her whole life confusing one with the other. The following morning, Marta went to speak with Helena. She found her on the balcony, having coffee and leafing through a magazine. "Mrs. Helena, I need to tell you something." Helena lowered the magazine. "Speak." "I'm leaving." The silence lasted 5 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes. Helena placed the cup on the table with excessive care, as if the care she took with the cup was the only control she had over the situation. "Where to?" "To Araguari." Helena let out a short, dry, humorless laugh. "To go after that man." "To come after me." Helen looked at her, and for an instant, just an instant, something crossed her face that wasn't anger or contempt or sarcasm. It was something else, something that looked very much like envy. The envy of someone who never had the courage to do what Marta was doing. The envy of someone who remained trapped in a comfortable life and called it wisdom. "And the children?" Helena asked, and for the first time her voice cracked. "The children are yours, Donna Helena. They always have been. I only took care of them while you were unable to. Now you will have to manage." Helen swallowed. She opened her mouth as if to say something cutting, something that would put Marta back in her place. But she looked at that woman standing on the balcony, her hands crossed in front of her body, her chin raised in a way she had never seen before, and she couldn't find the words, because Marta was no longer asking. She was informing. And there is a huge difference between a woman who asks and a woman who informs. And Helena felt that difference, like someone sensing a change in the wind. Saying goodbye to the children was the hardest part. Pedro didn't cry. His face remained serious, his lips pressed together, holding everything in, just as Marta had unintentionally taught him. Ana Luisa cried and gave her the entire folder of drawings, including the original Thunder. Tomas didn't understand. He stretched out his arms and said "Tata" in that voice that was like a prayer, and Marta held him tightly, breathed in his scent, imprinted that weight on her arms, and returned him to Helena with a pain she knew she would carry forever, but which was different from other pains. This was a clean pain, the pain of someone who had chosen. Marta left on a bus that departed at 6 a.m. from São Roque das Palmeiras. She carried a small bag, her mother's cookbook, Ana Luisa's sketchbook, and Elias's letter folded in her dress pocket. As the bus left the station, she looked out the window and saw the city shrinking, the houses becoming smaller, the fields opening up, and she felt a dizziness that wasn't fear. It was the sensation of someone moving for the first time after a lifetime of being still. The trip lasted 9 hours. Marta slept in some stretches, woke up in others, ate a bread roll with butter that she had wrapped the night before, and looked out the window with the attention of someone seeing the world for the first time. At some point between Uberlandia and Araguari, the field changed color, became greener, more open, and she thought that perhaps that was a sign, or perhaps it was just a field, and that perhaps the difference didn't matter. He arrived in Araguari in the late afternoon. He got off the bus with numb legs and a racing heart. He asked at the shops if anyone knew a man named Elias who owned land in the area. Surroundings. The second man, he asked, knew him. "Elias with the scar?" "Yes, he knows him. His land is up there, about 12 kilometers. Dirt road, second entrance on the right after the stream bridge." She got a ride with a man who was delivering milk in a pickup truck. The man didn't ask any questions. He dropped her off at the second entrance on the right after the bridge, as indicated, and continued on his way. Marta was left alone on the dirt road, her suitcase in hand, looking at a path that climbed between 2 grass-covered hills. The sun was low, golden, and cast a long light on everything, making each thing, every tree, every stone, every leaf, seem clearer, more real, more present than usual. She walked slowly up the path, not out of tiredness. out of respect for the moment. She wanted to feel each step. She wanted her feet to register that new land, that ground that might one day be hers, that place that didn't yet have a name but already had a blue curtain in the window. When he reached the top of the hill, he saw the house. Small, of simple brickwork, with a recently repaired roof that gleamed in the late afternoon light. There was a clothesline with a shirt and a pair of pants hanging on it. A skinny dog slept on the porch, and there was, in fact, a blue curtain on the bedroom window. Elias was standing with his back to a water tank, washing his hands. He didn't see her coming. He didn't hear her. It was the dog that raised its head first, sniffed the air, and barked once. A lazy, curious bark. Elias turned around, and he saw Martha, standing atop the hill, suitcase in hand, her dress crumpled from the trip, her hair loose in the wind, the sunlight hitting her back and outlining a silhouette that, at that moment, in that exact configuration of light and shadow and distance, was the most beautiful thing Elias had ever seen in his entire life. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He didn't do anything that's shown in movies. He just stood there, his hands wet, looking at her. And he smiled. A smile that started in his eyes and spread down his whole face, slowly, like the sunrise. Marta dropped her bag on the floor and walked over to him. When she got close enough to smell the earth and soap coming from him, Marta said, her voice firm yet trembling, like a bridge that sways but doesn't collapse, "I came." Elias took her hands, those large, thick, cracked hands, and held them in his own, which were identical. A worker's hand holding another worker's hand. The hand of someone who was a tool holding the hand of someone who was invisible. And he said, "I know," the door was open. They didn't kiss at that moment. They stood there, holding hands, looking at each other with the quietude of those who need nothing more, because everything that was necessary was already happening. The puppy went back to sleep. The sun continued to set. The wind made the blue curtain sway in the window as if the house were breathing. Later, much later, when night had already fallen and the stars had appeared with that intensity that only exists far from cities, Marta was sitting on the porch of the house, her house. With a mug of coffee in her hands, Elias stood beside her, in the comfortable silence they had built together, a silence that now had a specific address. From inside the house came the smell of rice, because Marta had already found the kitchen, organized the groceries, and begun to transform those walls into something that felt like home. She looked at the sky, and thought of Pedro, of Ana Luisa, of Tomas. She thought of Tomas's outstretched hands saying "Tata," and felt the pain she had promised to bear. She thought of Helena, alone with her children for the first time truly, and felt no anger. She felt a strange compassion, the compassion that is born when we finally break free from those who held us captive and realize that this person was also imprisoned. She thought of her mother, of the cookbook, of the dried yellow flower between the pages, of the image of Our Lady that hung on the wall of her new room, the room with the blue curtain, of the round mirror that had remained on the farm and how she no longer missed it, because now she had eyes that did the work the mirror never knew how to do. "What are you thinking about?" Elias asked. Marta took a sip of coffee. She looked at him, and she said a truth so simple it hurt because it was so beautiful. "I'm thinking that my whole life I thought I was worthless, that I was too big, too ugly, too invisible. And now I'm here, sitting on my balcony next to a man who put up a blue curtain in his window because he remembered the mug I set aside for him. And I'm thinking that maybe the problem was never me. Maybe the problem was the place." Elias said nothing. He simply stretched out his arm and put it over her shoulders, and Marta rested her head on his shoulder, that shoulder where Thomas had rested his head months before, and felt the weight of her own body, for the first time, not as a burden, but as a presence, as something that existed, that occupied space, that had value. The wind swept between the hills, raising a scent of damp earth, even though it hadn't rained. The crickets chirped with a regularity that seemed like prayer. The dog snored on the porch, and the blue curtain, it swayed in the window of a small, simple, imperfect house, where two people whom the world had forgotten finally remembered each other, and they stayed there, together, in the right place,